Welcome back to another Top 10's Day Wednesday video. In today's video, we're going to talk about 10 cards I want to put into decks, but don't because I don't want to help you win the game. Wizards has created well over 20,000 unique Magic the Gathering cards since the game's inception back in 1993. Not all cards are created equal, and from all of these thousands and thousands of Magic cards, there are some really good cards that inexplicably help opponents. I want to win the game. Why am I trying to help you win? Keep those words in mind as we begin this top 10 list. Number 10 on this list is Winds of Abandon. This sorcery from Modern Horizons 1 revisits the overload mechanic first seen in Return to Ravnica. By paying the overload cost of a spell, its controller gains additional benefits. Probably the most popular overload spell is Cyclonic Rift, which, when overloaded, returns all non-land permanents your opponents control to their owner's hands. Enter Winds of Abandon. For 1 and a white, exile target creature you don't control, and for each creature exiled this way, its controller searches their library for a basic land and puts these cards onto the battlefield tapped. When the overload cost of 4 and 2 white is paid, exile each creature you don't control instead. There's a good possibility that a lot of opponents' basic lands will enter the battlefield after overloading a Winds of Abandon. When building EDH decks, my awareness to cards like Winds of Abandon is heightened, and I always include at least 5 basic lands in order to benefit from its casting. Don't be the player who is not rewarded with some free real estate by not including basic lands in your deck. The potential resource payoff by opponents is too high for me to play this card, but I sure want to. Number 9 on this list is Concordant Crossroads and Mass Hysteria. These enchantments are included together because they do the same thing, and that is give all creatures haste. Concordant Crossroads first appeared in Legends and actually is not on the reserved list. Mass Hysteria was printed in Mirrodin and is awaiting its first reprint. In dedicated creature decks, a player may believe that they have the advantage of including a global haste enabler. From a volume perspective, that may be true. However, the risk factor involved is sky high. Infect is an archetype begrudgingly played in the EDH format, where dealing just 10 points of damage with Infect kills a player. Voltron is a very popular archetype as well, where dealing just 21 points of combat damage with a general is lethal to a player. Providing an accelerant such as Global Haste can speed up opponents' game plans, particularly if they steadily partake in any of the aforementioned archetypes. What's scarier than a Blightsteel Colossus? One with haste. What's scarier than Rafik of the Many? Rafik with haste. What's scarier than Death Touch creatures with Finn the Fangbearer? Death Touch creatures with haste. What's scarier than Narset Enlightened Master? Narset with haste. Well, they're not getting haste from me. Number 8 on this list is Harmonic Sliver. I love slivers. Slivers were one of the premier creature types when I began my foray into Magic the Gathering back in the fall of 1997. I have multiple sliver decks with different archetypes for each one. I have a 5-color kitchen table sliver deck called Sliving Death, which takes advantage of sliver sacrifice effects and wins the game with Living Death. I have an EDH sliver deck piloted by the first sliver, which attempts to combo off with Cascade, winning in a variety of ways. I have a Selesnya kitchen table sliver deck with full playsets of Muscle Sliver, Sinew Sliver, Predatory Sliver, Quick Sliver, Plated Sliver, and Poison Sliver, and tries to win with poison counters. Do you know what I don't have in any of those decks? Harmonic Sliver. You see, Harmonic Sliver's trigger forces the destruction of an artifact or enchantment whenever a sliver enters the battlefield. It is not a may trigger. It does not target just opponents. It simply states, whenever a sliver enters the battlefield, destroy target artifact or enchantment. This helps opponents by potentially destroying our own permanents. No way, no chance, nope. Use your own removal spells because you're not getting them from me. Number 7 on this list is Mana Flare and Heartbeat of Spring. These enchantments are included together because they do the same thing, and that is whenever a player taps a land for mana, that player adds 1 mana of any type that land produced. I have seen these cards backfire on their controllers so many times. I have done it numerous times. The biggest drawback when casting this spell is that each subsequent opponent gets to utilize the effect with their entire land base, whereas the casters of Mana Flare and Heartbeat of Spring must wait until their next turns to utilize the additional mana provided by these cards. If these enchantments are still on the battlefield, of course. I have seen players in turn order utilize the extra mana in order to get ahead and then destroy the Mana Flare or Heartbeat of Spring before its controller gets a full turn with it on the battlefield. I've seen it happen. I've done it. I have seen these cards backfire on their controllers so much that I do not have either Mana Flare or Heartbeat of Spring in any of my decks. Other players won't be getting any extra mana from me. Number 6 on this list is Edric, Spymaster of Trust. This beloved commander's presence forever will be included on this list. Throughout my years of playing EDH, I can't recall any instances in which Edric's presence on the battlefield didn't cause headaches for his controller. Whenever a creature deals combat damage to one of Edric's opponents, the controllers of those creatures may draw a card. Have you ever participated in or overheard the following conversation with Edric in play? Hey, if I attack you for 1 point of damage so I can draw a card, is that okay? Then next turn, you can attack me for 1 point of damage and draw a card. Yep. Although the motivation for opponent combat is favorable, players' thirsts for drawing cards adds a warping political element to the table, thereby enhancing opponents' hands while their life totals only minimally drop. Yes, Edric's controller is afforded this same luxury, but that player is usually outnumbered at the commander table. Edric always seems tantalizing to play, but resist the urge. I have. Number 5 on this list is Karthus, Tyrant of Jund. Risk, paranoia, danger, apprehension, hazard, liability, gamble, anxiety, paralysis, heebie-jeebies. These are some words that come to my mind as I sit at the computer drafting this list thinking about the Tyrant of Jund. I have numerous dragon decks, including an EDH deck piloted by Scion of the Ur-Dragon. When building or updating a dragon deck, a brief glimpse of infatuation washes over me as I consider the potential power of including Karthus. A 7/7 flyer with haste that gives other dragon creatures you control haste is so tempting that it borders on seduction. Beguilement aside, I snap out of it and remember that there is a block of text in between Karthus's evergreen mechanics and haste-enabling ability which dooms the relationship before it begins. When Karthus enters the battlefield, gain control of all dragons and untap them. Cloning and reanimation are very popular in Magic, particularly in the Commander format. Imagine an opponent casting Reanimate on Karthus and, whoops, they gain control of your dragons. Oh, they're untapped? Oh, they all have haste. It's nearly an instant loss. Imagine the opponent that clones Karthus and, whoops, if it's not Spark Double, then they sacrifice their clone and keep Karthus alongside of all your other dragons. Oh, they're untapped? Oh, they all have haste, too. Nope. No way. Karthus will never see entry into any of my dragon decks. Number 4 on this list is Well of Knowledge. A card from the reserved list, this artifact doesn't seem overly harmful. During their draw step, that player may pay 2 and draw a card as many times as they like. In my EDH experiences, I don't recall playing against this card in any game ever, and I can assure you that I've never included it in any of my commander decks. The presence of Well of Knowledge in a format that is popular for casting big, mana-intensive spells means that players pack big-time mana production into their decks. It's EDH. It's what we do. That's what makes it the greatest Magic format. Timing specificities aside, providing opponents with the option of drawing additional cards during their draw steps can produce a disastrous imbalance of resources, particularly if any opponents can abuse their mana bases. That doesn't happen in Commander, right? There aren't spells, archetypes, and decks that are constructed merely for the purposes of abusing mana bases, right? Wrong. And because of that, this well runs dry for my opponents, as copies of this card will never be included in any of my commander decks. Number 3 on this list is Horn of Greed. Of all the cards on this list, and we still have 2 more to go, Horn of Greed is the card I consider adding the most frequently, particularly if I am building a landfall or lands matter deck. I begin by trying to convince myself that my additional land drops each turn will outvalue my opponents. I won't miss land drops because lands, and playing them, are the focus of the deck. My opponents may miss a land here and there, but I never will. So I will outpace their card drawing, and the presence of Horn of Greed will be much more beneficial to me than my opponents. Yep. Tell the gods of Magic that one and see what happens. Playing lands and not missing land drops is a Magic the Gathering premium. Does it happen? Of course. Is it predictable? Nope. Can anything be done to prevent it? Nope. The potential for Horn of Greed to backfire is far too great. That's why Horn of Greed is, but I'll tell you what it isn't, in any of my decks. Number 2 on this list is Howling Mine. At the beginning of each player's draw step, if Howling Mine is untapped, that player draws an additional card. That's it. There are no hoops to jump through. There's no need to trigger it by playing lands, paying mana, or dealing combat damage to an opponent. It sits out on the battlefield, howling away as players draw additional cards. Seriously? Number 2 on this list? Why so much hate? Because this is the ultimate act of helping opponents. As previously mentioned, there are no hoops to jump through. There's no need to trigger it by playing lands, paying mana, or dealing combat damage to an opponent. It sits out on the battlefield howling away as players draw additional cards. Nearly every card on this list needs some type of activation from which to benefit. Not with Howling Mine. Of course, in more focused artifact builds, players can create scenarios during which Howling Mine is tapped during their opponent's turns. Those builds are few and far between. Howl all you'd like, but this artifact will not be seen in any of my EDH decks. Lastly, number 1 on this list is Rites of Flourishing. This enchantment is literally a globalized version of a combination between Exploration and Howling Mine, earning its number 1 spot on this list hands down. Even the total converted mana cost of Exploration and Howling Mine is the exact same as Rites of Flourishing at 2 and a green. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Each player may play an additional land on each of their turns. There is no if Rites of Flourishing is untapped clause a la Howling Mine. That's it. That's all. A global enchantment that allows every player to draw an extra card each turn and play an additional land each turn. Extra cards, extra lands, extra spells. What do you think the realistic converted mana cost of this spell would be if it only allowed its controller to draw an additional card and play an additional land? Anyway, similar to Howling Mine, this card just sits on the battlefield and allows everyone to partake in its generosity. There are no hoops to jump through, there's no need to trigger it by playing lands, paying mana, or dealing combat damage to an opponent. Rites of Flourishing is number 1 on this list because it is the ultimate gift that keeps on giving, but also to opponents. That'll do it for this top 10 list. Which cards made your list? Let me know in the comment section below, and don't forget to hit those like and subscribe buttons on the way out. This is MTG Burgeoning, your channel for all things Magic.